Hey there, gamers. Welcome to another Web DM. Put an ad in on Craigslist and Jim Davis showed up, so we're about to have a casual encounter. All right, Jim, let's have an encounter about encounters.
Yes.
When it comes to encounters in your gaming session, how do you like to plan those out? We all know what the DMG says. But
Right. The 6 to 8 encounters per day. I find that's a lot of encounters.
yeah, doing a lot of stuff.
Particularly outside of like the first 3 levels.
Yeah.
And then even if you at level 1, 6 encounters might really push the party to their breaking point at an early level. Like we found out, say, in Horde of the Dragon Queen.
Yes.
With the number of encounters. I think that might be the only session that we've played where we had the recommended number of encounters per day.
Yeah, like the first session. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think in some editions of D&D, classic D&D, old D&D, 6 to 8 encounters per day is nothing. Not that you would want to fight that often in old D&D. You'd be that'd be a bad day for you if you had to fight that many times. But I find like this idea that there's a number of encounters per day or per adventuring period really artificial. It cropped up in 3rd edition, as far as I can tell, with sort of like their baseline assumption of 4 encounters per day, stuck around through 4th edition, and then in 5th has now become the 6 to 8 medium to hard, or whatever it is, encounters per day. So for me, I take a much more naturalistic approach.
Yeah.
If there are no combat encounters that arise out of your actions or the player's actions, then there's just no combat encounters. If no enemies are seeking you out, if you don't go seeking out a fight, then there's just not going to be a combat.
You might diplomance your way out of all the combat.
You absolutely
We've done
could.
that many times.
Many times. And I award XP for those encounters. And in a way, combat is one part of the game, social interaction and environmental exploration being the other two. And social interaction and environmental exploration should have XP tied to them. Yeah. They should be considered full encounters. There are class abilities and features and spells that operate in those kinds of encounters.
Yeah.
And why not award XP for them? In terms of combat encounters, I really plan for between 3 to 4 if I know it's going to be a combat-heavy session.
Yeah.
So, like, you guys are going and assaulting the Council of Savants in Grackle's Tug, for instance. I know that's going to be sort of wrap up from the previous session, maybe a light encounter there. There's the fight at the Dragon's Lair with the Keepers of the Flame.
Yeah,
then there's the different encounters as you assault the Halls of Sacred Spells and confront the Council of Savants and what they've been up to in Grackle's Tug. And so I don't map those out. I don't use the CR system. I just go, number one, what's going to make for kind of an interesting fight? Is it the dwarves darting in and out of the tunnels, trying to pick and nibble away at the dragon while getting roasted, and then having a fight in their pyromanced tunnels that they've got going on? Or is it the collective hive mind of 36 Darrow savants who are trying desperately to fend off the party and keep them at bay while they do whatever it is that they're doing in the city at large?
Yeah, that was ridiculous. It was a lot of fun.
So those kinds of encounters I want them to be, I would rather have 2 or 3 memorable, interesting fights than 6 to 8, here's 1d4 plus 1 goblins. That does change things, though. It does mean that classes that rely on long rest to get their abilities recharged become more powerful the fewer fights you have in a day.
Yeah.
And the classes that don't rely on a long rest and rely more on short rests, fighters, warlocks, monks, they lose out on that and become less, they don't get to use their class features as often, and therefore have less of an impact on the game. I don't find it as bad as 3rd edition, but it does, it happens.
Going back to that, like getting enough rest to handle those encounters, there are some alternate rules or ways of thinking about short rest, long rest.
Yeah.
That could allow that.
Right.
Or the opposite, make it a little harder, right?
Make it a little harder, yeah. So if you're the type of DM who's really concerned about mechanical balance and making sure that the power difference in classes is kept to a minimum,
right?
Because there's always going to be some power difference in classes. then you maybe say, use the variant rule from the DMG that says a short rest is 8 hours and a long rest is 1 week.
Right.
And you can only take so many long rests in a month-long period or something.
Right.
That makes, if you're a kind of DM who's just going to have 1 or 2 encounters per day, but you still want to bring in the tension of resource depletion, of having the spellcasters who get spells back on a long rest, having them have to manage their spells and sort of take custody of that list.
Instead of going in on the first round and
instead
casting
of just
a
like casting
fifth level
spells the very first thing you do every fight, because you know you're going to long rest in between. It's going to happen. I've never personally encountered what some DMs call the 15-minute adventuring day, whereas the party goes out, blows all their magic within the first combat, and then takes a nap. That's never been. I feel like that's a table problem, not a rules problem. If DMs are encountering a 15-minute adventuring day, it's up to them to take the table and the group as a whole and say, hey, this isn't working for me. You got to keep up the momentum. Maybe don't nova all of your spells and abilities at once. But I also find that players feel the need to nova and use all of their best magic in response to really tough encounters. So that's why I try to at least have multiple fights in a day if I'm going to have a combat-heavy session.
Okay, so how deadly do you make your encounters? Or when you're making an encounter, do you go, this is going to be a deadly encounter?
Not usually. No, I read those sections of the DMG the first time around and tried to use the rules to construct encounters using the CR system and found it wildly inconsistent and not a really good gauge for any kind of difficulty. That I would create difficult encounters, say in Rise of Tiamat, and you guys would plow through them.
Right.
And much to my surprise, because I'm like, oh, the XP system says this should be a deadly fight. It means they should use up this amount of their resources. Perhaps one of them drops to 0, and you guys were just like trouncing it. And so I'd have to like say double the threat there. Instead of 1 dragon, it's like 2, and then it's minions.
Maybe we were just that badass, man.
I mean, it's also, you guys are optimizers. And so, for people who optimize, they think about their choices, they make characters that are both mechanically effective and interesting in terms of their role-playing capacity. You're going to just need more difficult encounters. We also use all the options. We use feats. We use early magic items. We use multi-classing. Those increase the power of the player characters, whereas if we were using stat array or point buy, no feats, no multi-classing, basic 5th edition, then I think the rules in the DMG would be more accurate and more consistent.
Yeah, but why even get out of bed in the morning if that's what you're going to go play with?
I mean, some people really like it. They think the options take away something for them, and they prefer a more focused, less cluttered version of the game, which I appreciate because I love old D&D, and there's like no options in that. You just make your character and roll their hit die every level.
Can you make a fire? Yes. Well, you're probably going to live longer.
But in terms of like the deadliness of an encounter, it's very easy to go overboard with it. So that's why I use waves, which we've talked about in a previous episode, where I might say, all right, every other wave, like I might have 5 waves of enemies mapped out. And after the first 2, I'm going to think like, okay, who all's hurt? How many spells have they used? It's a more intense. It requires the DM to know the capacity of what their players can do. How many hit points do they have? What's their highest level spell? What magic do they like using? What magic items do they have? It requires you to be more in tune with that, but at the same time, it allows you to go, well, maybe that 4th wave doesn't show up. It's sort of a Schrodinger's encounter. Kind of, it's like, if needed to create a more tense situation, maybe I'll throw it in. If it looks like the players are done with fighting and we've been doing it for an hour and it's time to wrap up, that 4th encounter's not, that 4th level or wave or whatever is not going to show up. Those are the tools that DMs have to create dynamic, interesting combat encounters.
Right.
I would recommend interspersing and saying there should be a balance of social, environmental, and combat, probably in equal measure, and that XP should be awarded equally for all of them, just because that's the kind of game I like to run. And I think the game, it's not going to break, it's not going to go off the rails or anything. If that's what you do.
You mentioned social and exploration encounters again.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite like social and environmental or exploration encounters that you like to use?
So, I mean, I think that building alliances, I know in 5th edition, all of the published adventures at least have a real strong component because of the 5 factions in the Forgotten Realms that they're really pushing. I think that's a part of the organized play that we don't really get into at our table. So I much prefer you guys to seek out your own alliances and recognize that, first off, in order to forge an alliance, you have to be able to trust the NPCs, which means DMs don't always have NPCs betray the party. NPCs should be trustworthy to the extent that the party can rely on them and feel like that they're not going to get screwed over by everybody. There's a style of DMing that says NPCs are there to just screw over the players, and I think that's unfun and unfair. So alliance building, letting the players go, these are the people in the world we want to have more, a stronger connection with, and building off of that, whether it's the factions that are in the Forgotten Realms or your player and DM created own factions, that's fine. Social encounter could be anything. It could be haggling over the price of an item. It could be getting information out of an NPC that they might not otherwise want to give up. So the use of deception, the use of persuasion, the use of disguise kits and altered identities. Real spycraft kind of stuff that I really like.
Yeah. And if all else fails, you can always just kill them and speak with dead.
And if all else fails, you just kill them and speak with dead and hope that they don't lie to you or give you a cryptic answer. But it also brings up, the detect thought spell, having a casual conversation with a potential antagonist. If you're disguised, do they know it's you? Do they not? Can you read their thoughts? Can they not? Those are all, and you can resolve those without a single die roll. Which are sometimes really fun. You just play it out, see what happens, and ask the right questions. It does require skills, particularly social encounters, require skills that test the player and not the character. And so that's a balance that every table is going to find different. Some people just want to roll a dice and they want to say, here's my persuasion check.
But also with the mechanics in hand, if someone, say, isn't as good at role-playing. They like playing the game, but they're not as good as that, but they are playing a social character. The rules are still there, so they can just make the roll.
They can just make the roll,
we do at our table, we try to encourage people to RP out social interactions because it's just more fun and fluid if you're actually like...
It absolutely is.
Because all of us can talk a good line of shit, so...
Yeah, and even if you don't, even if you have a player at your table who's just maybe they're socially awkward, maybe they just don't have a lot of experience because they're not a wheeler, dealer, manipulator, but they like the idea of playing, say, a Tyrion Lannister.
Right.
Or a Varys.
I'm going to make him.
And,
make him.
They've rolled up their mastermind rogue, but as a player, they're rocking their 10 charisma.
Yeah.
How do you provide an enjoyable experience, or how do you help them build an enjoyable experience for themselves? First off, you're just forgiving. You recognize as a DM there's a difference between what a player can do and what their character can do.
Yeah.
And if a character has an 18 charisma and an expertise in persuasion, just because that player can't articulate exactly what that character would do, you got to help them out. You got to be like, let them find their comfort zone in terms of how interactive they want to be with their social encounters.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Or onto exploration if they want to be a Laura Croft.
Yeah, if they want to be
or
a
Nathan Drake.
Yeah, then let them do that. Make those athletic checks. I mean, one thing I find with exploration, a common mistake is too many checks.
Yeah.
Like, you got to make a check for every 10 feet of climbing, or you got to make a stealth roll for every 15 minutes or something. And I don't like a lot of checks.
Yeah.
Now, the downside of that is you can really botch, say, one climbing check. And if you didn't do well, then that can, really screw up an encounter. I'm usually generous with retries. But also try not to say, like, I need 20 checks to get through this stealth encounter, because that's just 20 opportunities for failure. I think if a player if a character is an expert in something, they probably don't need to roll for most mundane things.
Right.
If you've got a 18 dex and expertise in stealth, and particularly if you then also stack buffs on top of that, it's just be like, you're like a ghost. You just get in and out. Or if it's a bardic character or persuasive type character that's got their diplomacy and persuasion maxed out, then most casual encounters, people like them, they do what they want to do, and really only make them roll for the stuff that has consequences.
Yeah, they're actually going up against an antagonist who actually has an opposing point of, motivation.
Motivation.
Trying to, call them out on that in public.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah. So I mean, it's what the players choose for their characters tells the DM what kind of game they want to play in.
Right.
And if a player has a bunch of combat, you know, if you've got a table full of fighters, then you better maybe try to have 6 to 8 combat encounters a day.
Yeah.
But if you've got a mix, then
yeah, I will say in the Spelljammer campaign, that's been the biggest challenge for me. Is
all those
a
spellcasters.
whole bunch of casters. And
Yeah.
it's my least proficient thing as far as playing. I'm more of the fighty, roguey, whatever type.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting trying to challenge y'all. I'll say that.
Yeah, it is, and so party composition determines a lot of what kind of encounters you'll have, how often you'll have them, what the stakes are.
Yeah.
For a campaign like Spelljammer, to me it makes perfect sense that we would all play spellcasters because the vehicles that we use to travel around are powered by spells.
Yeah.
So more spellcasters, the more people that can fly the ship.
Yeah.
But it does create issues in terms of what we're capable of.
Yeah,
what we do.
most definitely. So once again, thanks for watching WebDM. Go ahead and subscribe. Let us know in the comments. Head on over to Facebook. Like us over there. Tell your friends about us. Come on back next time. We can't wait to see you. Have a good one.